If you could please take your seats. What we're going to do with the question and answer is we have two people in the center aisle. One will be asking you what your question is and making sure that it is concise, because we academics like to take long prefaces for our questions to build background, and we don't really have time for a lot of that if we're going to have a good question and answer session. So concise questions, and often when I go through the cards, there's dozens of the same question or variations on the same theme. So that will also, if you're asked to state your question concisely, you may be told that, oh, we've already got several of those questions asked. And then the second person will control the microphone so that, frankly, we don't ramble on, because I have that problem when I have a microphone, as you will find out very shortly. But I would like to start the conversation by taking director's privilege and say thank you, Dr. Hart. And I would love to have a conversation with you at some point, maybe not right now, about how the tenure process reinforces the scientific literature and low-hanging fruit. What needs to be published are the headline-grabbing results, because no one wants to publish, oh, well, we did this and didn't find any difference. Negative results don't get published as they used to. So at some point, we should talk about that. And I will also open this up now to the panelists if there are any particular questions that are on your minds. Panelists, you got first shot.
I guess
this is a bizarre-ass thing.
Yeah.
Having these panelists up here and me, when you got an audience that came here you guys should be the people that are asking questions and talking.
All right, well then we will open it up to the audience right away.
I mean, if the panelists have some burning issue, particularly when they disagree, let's hear it. But let's give the audience full billing here. Let's go. That means you're on, man. And let's be concise and let's do it.
So, Dr. Hart, what would you say to your son or daughter if they came up to you and said, Dad, I'm thinking about trying methamphetamine?
Well, I wrote about it. It's on alternet.com. So I wrote about a conversation that I had with my son about drugs, and I took him to a party one night. I picked him up. He was about 16, I guess, and I was like, damn. When it was late at night when we returned, and I thought, damn, he might have used some drugs. And it was one of those things, I caught myself going through this nonsense that people say, well, look for the signs and that sort of thing. And I thought, that's not effective. And so what I made sure that I do is to make sure I tell them what the real concerns are with their drug use. And first of all, I'm not going to really think about methamphetamine first. That would be ridiculous and irresponsible of me as a parent. The drug that they are most likely to have, tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, those are the major things that I worry about. In this case, this son has asthma. And so the first thing we talked about was, okay, just make sure you have your inhaler. Make sure you know that, we talked about the effects. They come to my talk so they know what the major effects are. And know that you're black. And so that means that's the major concern that I have. Make sure you use the drug in an environment where there is almost no risk of you interacting with the police. And so we talk about all of those things. And I'm sure, I don't want to put his business out, which I won't, but I'm sure that he has or will use drugs. But you know what? I am more concerned about how well he is contributing to the society. And right now, that particular son is 20. And his job for our society is to do well in school. In high school, almost a straight A student. He's in an Ivy League institution, doing really well. And he might have used drugs. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is that he's going to contribute to this society. That's it.
You still didn't answer the question, though. Dad, I want to use methamphetamine. What would you say to that? And the point of the question is, what would you say to young people, or anybody for that matter? Dad, I want to use I want to use methamphetamine. I want to use heroin recreationally. I just want to give it a shot. What do you think about that?
Well, I think I said that. I did answer the question. I told you that the drug that he's most likely to use is marijuana, alcohol, and tobacco. I did answer the question. But if he wanted to use methamphetamine, it would be treated in the same way, just like that. If he wanted to use heroin, it would be treated in the same way. Drug specific, what the real concerns are. Okay, what's the source? You wouldn't start using a drug for the first time, for example, smoking. Hopefully you start using it orally. You certainly wouldn't start with needles. If they do, then you probably have a parenting problem.
Could I jump in?
Please.
Yeah. No. I think it's important to add another element to this. So it's not just the physiology that we're talking about or what's in the compound that is in the drug. Your son has come to you and has said something very important. My first response, and then I would follow up with what some of Dr. Hart was saying, is thank you. Thank you for telling me you're thinking about this. It makes sense. That's what's important. How many of you can go back to when your kids were really little, infants? We measured think about the first one. We measured so carefully what we were going to give them when they were sick, because we knew that these substances had beneficial effects and potentially harmful effects if we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, I must have spilled a Dimetap a dozen times before I got the right dose. So the same thing applies here. Thank you for telling me, what are you thinking about? Why are you thinking about that? And let's see. If you're going to proceed anyway, because you're out there in the world, my kids are a little younger, but not that much, I want to arm you with the best possible information. And by the way, society and your teachers and doctors have not done that, so we have a lot of catching up to do. So.
You know, you mentioned, Dr. Hart, to call attention to those who provide misinformation. And the misinformation for me here is that we know that certain drugs are going to result in addiction potential to a much higher degree. And certainly that would be the case with methamphetamine, heroin, other drugs of that nature. We also know...
And that would be part of the education.
And I would also point out that the data doesn't support that.
We also know that using drugs as a young person increases...
And in terms of things compared...
Wait, let him finish that last point, because he's getting ready to say some misinformation right now. Go on.
We also know that using drugs as a young person, as an adolescent, will dramatically increase the risk of addiction. And so by virtue of sharing this information, that use somehow is not problematic is misinformation.
Well, what you just said is somebody who has a little bit of information and misinterpreted or broadly applied it. The notion that people who start using drugs early and then they're more likely to become addicted, that's true, but it's not the drug per se. No. There are other things that those young people are engaged in that need to be dealt with even more so than the drug use. That's the point. And so you didn't get the full education.
Yell in there.
I'd take issue with that. I agree with virtually everything you have said, and have been saying that much the same for a long time, especially in terms of misinterpretation of scientific studies and the distortion in the literature. But one cannot ignore, for example, the genetic vulnerability that's very powerful.
No. What is the evidence?
I don't know. There's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of evidence for that.
No, that's just simply not true in terms of genetics. I'm looking at this right now.
Just a minute. Now, there's tons and tons of evidence, and we know that, well, for example, if you have a family history is, first of all, the strong...
Family history is not genetic, by the way.
I didn't say it was. But this is a heritable disorder. It's about 60% heritable, and about 40% environmental.
What are you talking about? Alcohol?
Alcohol.
So that varies widely, and that's the only drug that you have that high number with. I mean, I'm looking at this evidence now, and I am just not convinced because it varies so widely, and alcohol is the only one that you have any signal. You certainly don't have a signal with cocaine, with methamphetamine, or none of these other drugs.
I think it's very hard to know because so few people use those comparatively. You certainly do with nicotine. But let me just tell you from a clinical perspective too. And one thing I think it's easy to get into. It's all environmental, and I think misinterpret what you're saying. For example, when I have a new heroin addict, new patient who comes to me with a heroin addiction, lately they've all been like 20, 21, 22 years old. And I ask them, the very first time you took an opiate, do you remember it? And they'll say, yeah, I had my wisdom teeth taken out and I took a Vicodin. I will ask them, and how did you feel on it? And they, to 100% certainty, every one of them says, I loved it. And they say it like that.
I say the same thing.
No,
I loved it. What does that mean?
Okay, what it means is that they have a genetic vulnerability. And we know what that is. We know what that is. Most people don't like opiates.
No, that's not. I loved it, and I certainly have never had
I'm not being overly deterministic here. All I'm saying is that there's a vulnerability there that's very clearly genetic, and that's true with.
No, that's not clearly genetic. That's not. That does not equate to clear genetic information. That's not true. That's misinformation.
Okay, so
I believe Mike has.
I had a thought, so somewhere in between here. Let's say that is evidence of heritability. The general rate of addiction, or let's just take alcohol, 5%?
15.
15% of alcoholism? I think it's, let's say 15%.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I was thinking.
No. So the general rate of alcoholism or alcohol use disorder is something on the order of 5 to 7%. And even if...
No, that's you talking about lifetime now or at any given time?
Any given time.
Okay, it's about 4%.
Yeah, okay. We're quibbling between 4 and 15%. Whatever it is, if the heritability studies tell us that you're 6 times more likely to develop alcoholism yourself if it's in a first-degree relative, then do the math. It is something to be concerned about, but it's also not the way that it's portrayed in society, as if you have one single drink and your dad is an alcoholic, that's it. You're going to hit the skids immediately. So there's a intermediate opinion here. We just can't get as petrified about it as we have been, because then we won't have the conversations that we need to. One quick example is if you have a strong family history, you want to tell your kids that their reaction to the first time that they drink alcohol may be that they think they can handle it. Maybe some of you know this, but maybe a lot of you don't. And those people will think that they're invulnerable to the effects of alcohol. So that's something that you would tell them. It's different for opioids, but I think we should be here thinking about what kind of better information we give to our children.
I'd like to also say that we've been tossing that term addiction around again, and we have not clearly defined what that means. And that has been a persistent question coming from the audience, is what is that definition for addiction, and where do you say, okay, this person has an addiction versus where you say this person just uses? Where is that line, if there is a line?
When I use the term, I'm simply referring to the DSM terminology.
Right. Okay.
It's clear, I think we all speak that language.
Okay. And for our audience who doesn't speak that language, can you give us a brief summary of what that DSM language looks like?
Well, so DSM stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, and it's currently in its 5th edition, and it has specific diagnostic criteria for every kind of mental and substance use disorder. There are 11 criteria in DSM-5. The early symptoms are impaired control over use, because you set limits and you keep going over them. You keep trying to quit or cut down, you find it hard to do. You spend more time doing it than you wish. You'll drink and drive or do other physically hazardous things, and you'll develop preoccupation and desire and craving. Most people who develop alcohol use disorder only have those external symptoms, and it never really seriously causes functional disturbances like job loss or marital problems or serious health problems. Those things only occur later on. Sort of in the middle there are developing tolerance, where you need a lot more, or you develop withdrawal when you stop using. And the criteria are basically the same. There's 11 of them, and the number of criteria positive pretty well scales with severity, and the criteria are the same for every kind of substance. So you need 2 out of 11 to meet the current diagnostic, and so the current terminology is use disorder, so substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder, opioid use disorder. And the thing is that there's a tremendous range of drug involvement and a tremendous range of severity, and in early stages this is clearly reversible, in later stages probably not, depending on the drug, and drugs do vary a lot in terms of their addiction potential.
I'll just add that most people don't realize that Dr. Willenbring referred to a spectrum. There's a huge range, and they are divided in the DSM according to mild, moderate, and severe. And it's not until you get into the severe category that they're truly considered addiction, maybe some people in the moderate category. So the more of those criteria that he listed that you meet, the more severe addiction you have. Fewer criteria, then you fall more into the mild and moderate category. Most people with substance use disorders the vast majority fall into the mild and moderate category. It's the people with the severe disorders who fall into the severe the people with the severe in the severe category are the ones who usually wind up in addiction treatment programs, and they kind of shape our views of what addiction is. It's what we see on TV, but they really don't represent the vast majority of people with substance use disorders, whether it's drug or alcohol use disorders in this country, probably in the world.
Thank you.
And almost all of them go away over time, usually without any kind of specialty treatment.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we'll take 1 or maybe 2 more questions.
What?
I'm sorry. We have to get to lunch, too, and we have a program.
Look at that line.
I know.
Guess I'm pretty lucky.
Skip lunch.
So, thank you very much for your outstanding talk this morning, Dr. Hart. My question addresses a little bit of a twist on what you were trying to say. Knowing that drug abuse, alcohol abuse are overwhelmingly destructive to families, even when they occur in small numbers, and knowing also that they occur in families that are well-to-do, it does not affect social strata, and within the same families, like you were saying, you'll find one member out of many that may have the problem. So why my brother and not me? Or why 1 out of 10 children are not the others when they grew up in a very similar environment? How do we balance then our resources in society, our educational deal with all that, with the information that you were trying to get through this morning?
Well, you have to understand, first of all, they don't grow up in the same environment.
No.
I have 2 kids I raised, and they didn't grow up in the same household. One grew up when there was no one there, and the other one grew up when there was another kid there. They grow up when their parents have developed in certain ways and not other ways. And so, the frame when you say drug and alcohol destroys family or have this impact on family, I would ask you to change that frame to try and figure out what's really destroying or what's really bugging the person who has the problem or the problem that's manifesting in this thing that we're calling drug addiction or drug substance use disorder. For me, the most powerful thing for me is that the vast majority of people who use these drugs, all of them, don't have a problem. But some people do. And if those people have a problem, it seems that we should focus on those people and try to figure out what's going on with those people by giving them very comprehensive assessments to try and figure out what's going on with them, as opposed to going to the simple, easy frame of blaming that drug or saying that drug is doing this. Because trust me, in my book, I write about alcohol-related problems, other drug-related problems, and I too thought the drug was the problem. I no longer believe that. I'm trying to look at what really is causing the problem. Sometimes it might be co-occurring psychiatric illnesses. Sometimes it might be the person who's having the problem have limited options, other options. Sometimes it might be that there are limited responsibility skills, because a lot of these symptoms deal with tempering your behavior in certain domains, and they just have problems tempering their behavior in multiple domains. And so those are just a few reasons, but that's why we need good therapists to look beyond the drug and look at the person.
I would also add that children who come from the same family don't come into the world a blank slate. They come into the world, whether you want to call it a genetic predisposition or whatever, they come into the world with different predispositions. In my family, there is a tendency toward addiction. And some people like opioids and some people don't. Some people like alcohol and some people don't. I have one kid who, when he went through that stage where kids experiment with drugs, he said to me, my kids are pretty open, gee, you know, I went through that thing where we went to parties and kids tried this pill and that pill, and I really tried to like opioids, and I didn't. They just didn't do a thing for me. I have another kid who liked them. So, you know, and that's in the same family. So part of that is, whether you want to call it a genetic predisposition, that is something biological.
See, I worry about us talking about genetics. We talk about genetics as if it's the wastebasket of things we don't understand. And so if we're going to talk about genetics, please have some evidence. That whenever you say, well, we know that this is a genetics factor or function, have some evidence to show that. That's what I would encourage.
I think there's a lot of evidence. If you look at genetic epidemiologists and so forth, there's certainly just as good evidence that addiction and other substance use disorders are about as heritable as heart disease or asthma. But you know, the genetics are so complex because, as you know, we're talking about hundreds of genes, not at least, and so it's not a single gene or two, and that all contribute to the variability. And actually, most of the genetic vulnerability to mental health and substance use disorders, including personality disorders, is shared. It's common, and so it's environmental factors plus some specific genetic traits that help shape which direction it'll go in. And then finally, to say environment is not to say non-genetic, correct? Because the number one environmental trigger is early childhood neglect. And that we now know causes epigenetic changes in gene expression, particularly related to anxiety. And that's been conclusively demonstrated in rodents. And I also agree that you can't go from rodent models to humans very easily, but I think the evidence is very strong. It's as strong as it is for any other illness except simple illnesses like Parkinson's or Huntington's chorea. But in terms of these common complex disorders, the evidence is at least as strong as it is for any of them.
So next year, I will have a new book out. And this conversation, I want you all to look at the evidence, and then you decide.
Let's co-write it.
Can we have the next question, please?
I'm from Janesville High School, and I want to know, do you promote drug use when it's used correctly? And if so, will this leave more people vulnerable to addiction?
I'm sorry, what was that? Do I promote drug use?
Do you promote drug use when it's used correctly? If so, will this leave more people vulnerable to addiction?
Do I promote drug use if used correctly? Of course not. I mean, I'm an educator. I promote people being educated and informed in whatever activities they engage. And so when people frame the discussion in terms of promoting drug use, the goal is to shut down the discussion, or the goal is not. I find it low level. I find it actually beneath me. When people ask, am I promoting drug use? It's like, do you promote automobile driving?
Yeah.
Of course I don't promote automobile driving or riding in an airplane. All of these activities are potentially dangerous. But I do want people to, whoever engages in those activities, to be safe as possible. I have better things to do than promote drug use.
Thank you.
I enjoyed Dr. Murphy's talk yesterday and your talk this morning, Dr. Hart, and it would be interesting in the two of you drawing some connections between the prescription drug misuse you talked about and the biases in the drug addiction research industry.
Is it?
Okay, we will talk, I promise you.
No, I appreciate your comment. And I think that what Dr. Hart has done for all of us this morning is for us to really rethink a lot of what we have thought about drugs, to put all of our sort of shared notions of what a drug user looks like, what a drug user acts like, and you know, look at it in a lot deeper fashion. The other thing that I think Dr. Hart did very well was to talk about our funding sources. One of the reasons we have the information that we have, and other information that we really need, we don't have, is because the politics of what research questions get funded. Okay, so some of our laps are, it's not just bias in the sense of the way we interpret our findings. We don't even ask questions. We don't ask the questions about, okay, if 80% of the people that are using these particular drugs don't get in trouble with those drugs, how do they do that? How is it that they're able to do that? For many of you, this is incredulous. I mean, there's actually drug users in the world that go to college, that become president. How do they do that? And obviously, there's a lot of people that are doing that. And
to put a fine point on that, historically, in the 1700s in this country, in the 1800s, we had a lot of morphine people, opium. Laudanum tincture was really readily available and was sort of a panacea. So historically speaking, we have lots of evidence that people
manage
very well.
Right.
Well, yeah, you know, the National Institute on Drug Abuse is really best thought of as an arm of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, because they essentially dictate what can and cannot be. And their explicit goal, as Dr. Hart pointed out, is to find out that there's something wrong with, you know, these drugs are bad to use as drug war propaganda. That's why we don't have any. That's why the evidence base for medical marijuana, for example, is so poor, because NIDA would never fund, would never allow any research like that to be done, So there is a tremendous amount of distortion for political ends of what gets funded and what gets emphasized. And I think the other thing is that I've seen is that qualities of papers of much poorer quality than normally would be allowed to appear in high-quality journals, that the standard goes down when it's about a drug and some kind of a harm associated with a drug.
One more, and then we'll have to break for lunch.
There's been a lot of discussion this morning by the panel about the genetics of addiction. We now have the capability of doing very good genome-wide association studies with people who are clearly addicted. I'd like to know how much of this has been done so far in different types of drug addiction, and if not much has been done so far, why not, and when are the researchers going to do it?
There's quite a lot of that going on. Basically looking at different variations at certain gene points, but it's so extraordinarily complex, and you have to do it in such great numbers that one of the biggest problems is that a lot of these studies are done with very small numbers, like the neuroimaging trials in particular, because they're so expensive. Probably half or 75% of them can't be replicated. We have this replication crisis right now in the sciences. And so I just don't believe any of these small studies anymore, because most of them turn out to be wrong. So there was a naive optimism when the human genome was first described, and all sorts of predictions were made about what was going to happen as a result of that. But because it involves so many different genes in so many different areas, each contributing a tiny bit of variability, it's very, very hard to locate. It's not some huge effect size, and that's one of the biggest challenges.
Let me just respond to that briefly. We are now moving into the age of personalized medicine, and we do have the genetic information for this. I think that the researchers should be able to get the appropriate information in addiction as well.
Well, no, but actually, in terms of personalized medicine, it's very, very limited application so far for exactly the same reason.
Thank you.
Can I say?
We do have to get going, and I want to thank the panelists for their time. Mark, quick.
Yeah, quick. All this talk about genetics and environment, we have to understand that causes in reality are not simple. It's not one thing or another. Right. And genetic contributions, their impact changes with every year that a child grows.
Speak up a little bit.
Yeah.
Louder.
Every year that a child grows, the genetic contribution
Impact changes, yeah.
changes, and therefore, a sensitive parent is going to figure out, my kid is right now going to be, really vulnerable to this more than that. And by the way, that's why I would say to that parent, who I don't think we should have shouted down, for my kid, I would say, no, I don't want you to try heroin, because you have a tendency towards, whatever, becoming depressed, and this is not going to be good for you. And I think that's part of being a sensitive parent.
Thank you.
That was shouting down?
We're going to conclude the panel, but I would like to give you a little bit of a homework assignment. During lunch, think about this and maybe talk amongst yourselves. The Harrison Act in 1914 was 1914 was mentioned. That's where Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3, Schedule 4 drugs came into effect.
Oh, that's not true.
Is that not true?
1970.
What, 19 what?
70.
1970 was the scheduling? Okay. We have much more information now about what different drugs do. Is that scheduling? We cannot do research. Is this true? Cannot do research on Schedule 1 drugs?
No, you can.
Was I loud enough when I finally?
Yes,
You can in very specific.
Yeah,
I know.
We do a lot of research with marijuana, heroin.
Okay. Is it time to reconsider the scheduling laws so that we have this discussion over lunch, please?
Okay, but.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. The minute